Good afternoon. It is the 20th of April, 2020. This is the 23rd edition of the Old Growler. I'm the Old Growler, Pete LaFrance, glad to meet you. And it's the 37th day of no bars being opened here in New York, and that is why I am here. Yes, sirree, that's why I'm here. And if you've been watching the Old Growler for a little while, you know all of the stories that have gone along with it. And in fact, I tell you what, today I'd like you to meet someone that I've worked with for a long time. He's a good friend of mine, and I'm pretty sure you're gonna like what he has to say. The folks at Norwich University, his alma mater. Norwich, you've heard me mention Norwich University in the past. Yes, it's the oldest private military college in the United States. And yes, my friend went there between 1969 and 1974. You know, I think he'd like to say something to you. Okay, just hold on a second. I'm going to be right back. Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, hi, folks. Cadet Peter LaFrance, Norwich University Corps of Cadets 74, reporting. Glad to be with you. First off, I want to thank the Alumni Association of Norwich University for sponsoring me here today. I really do appreciate that, for inviting me to be part of the Legacy of Learning program, been suggested about beer. And a special thanks to Stephanie Snell for bringing me to their attention. I'm gonna hook my mic back up here. You probably didn't hear all of that. I hope you did. Anyways, whoops, other way around. There we go. As I said, I want to thank the Alumni Association and Stephanie Snell for inviting me to be part of this Legacy of Learning. For those of you who are watching now, or for those of you, Stephanie, greetings. Oh yes, we're going to get to the beer, that's for sure. For those of you who are watching this later, who are watching it now, possibly who were at Norwich at the same time I was, 69 to 74. My voice might be familiar to you because the years of 1971 to 74, I was the voice of Jazz Street, WNUB FM, broadcasting from Norwich University. And we had to know how to slip cue, and we had to know how to put carts in and all kinds of good stuff. And oh, those were the days. Sunday nights, I think, were my nights. Okay, well, since then, I've stayed in communicating and communications, kind of in a way. I started out freelancing back in 1976 to around 1990. I did some work for, I was mainly covering the small breweries. I started out doing a couple of, an article for the American Bureau of Shipping and some of the other smaller publications, some of the travel publications, mainly about, I did some stories about New England, I believe. But the American Bureau of Shipping paid me my first big bucks for a story on whaling on the Hudson River. Then that was the beginning. I started, then at the time, there were a lot of small breweries started to spring up, particularly in the West Coast, but there were some in the New England area. And I began writing about them and interviewing them for the small publications. And I caught the eye finally of a major publication here in New York, Beverage Media, and they asked me to do an article for them on sports bars. That was back in 1990. And I ended up there for 3 years, I believe 3 or 4 years, going from editor, from junior editor to assistant editor, junior editor, to finally managing editor. And that was where I had a chance to really learn a lot about putting together a magazine, but also the writing skills. It was a real education. And then there was a reorganization, and I wrote a couple of books, which I'll get to later, and ended up freelance once again. And I've been covering the malt beverage or the beverage alcohol hospitality industry since 1976. So it's been a long, strange trip, I tell you. And I've met some wonderful people. I've been to some fantastic restaurants, pubs, taverns, had some fantastic chefs cook for me. It's been a lot of fun. And so, as you can understand, pubs, bars, restaurants are all incredibly important to me as a writer about that particular industry, but as a journalist as well. The interaction that takes place in pubs and bars when they close down, or interaction that takes place in pubs and bars, are very important. I mean, just socially, and when they close down, for anyone, it's a difficult situation, but for journalists in particular, I think it is. And I have an anecdote to tell about that. Brendan Behan, the Welsh writer, was on his a book tour here in New York City, and it was the last book tour that he did. In fact, later that evening, he was taken to the infirmary for cirrhosis of the liver and never recovered. But at that book signing, he was asked by a woman, "Why are all writers alcoholic?" And his response was, "We're not all alcoholic, ma'am, but we all hang out in bars." And she said, "Well, why is that?" And he said, "Because it's the last social bastion of Western man." And it very much is, that's very much true. And so when the bars closed down, especially for me, as a journalist and covering the industry, it was a real, it was kind of traumatic. And so my friend, the Old Growler, came along, and he figured, well, you know, if I can't go out to bars and have beers, well, why not have beers? You know, why not have a beer here and invite people to come in? And so the Old Growler's been around for a while, and he's been a good buddy. And as far as the bars closing down and the reasons for the bars, we all know that there is a disease going around, COVID-19, and I'm not going to talk any more about that or about the politics or anything about that until the very end. So you're going to have to wait until the end if you really want to know what I think. But let's get to the beer and food connection. But no, you know something? It's time. It's time for a beer, because I happen to know that at 4:00 p.m. New York, it is 5:30 Gander, Newfoundland. So we know that it's after 5 o'clock in Gander. So thank you, Gander, for being there. And what are we're gonna, oh yeah, this is Oscar's Blue. If you take a look at some of the other videos that I have on the playlists, we have a great list of beer tastings called Meeting Expectations, or the Henry Street Ale House tastings. Take a look at that. Henry Street Ale House is about, I guess maybe 3 blocks, 4 blocks that way is usually where I pick up my growler of beer every day now that they've closed down. But they can sell growlers. But we go there every Thursday. Myself, Jerry Scott, and a buddy of mine. And what we do is we take a look at a can of beer, and as if we were regular consumers. And we take a look at it, we read it, we see what to expect. I mean, what are we expecting from? What are they trying to tell us? And it's not unusual that we will have other people visiting the bar, particularly tourists, because it is at the end of the Brooklyn Bridge. Stop in, and so take a look at some of those videos and see. But anyways, we take a look at it, and we find out what it's supposed to be. This one is a 2020 barrel aged series by Oscar Blues Brewery. It's an imperial stout aged in bourbon barrels with toasted almonds and Madagascar vanilla beans. So I'm expecting it. It's got a rather strange looking esoteric label, and it's called Ba 20, Volume 1, Almond, which is a type of fermentation. But enough of that. Enough of that. Let's have a beer. That's what we're here for. All right. Let's see what this looks like. Don't lie to the people. You've had this one before. Yeah, in fact, we have. Take a look back. A couple of. Here we go. It's dark. It's dark. It's certainly a stout. Oh, well, it's got a nice aroma. Well, I call it a nose, but it's my nose that checks its nose. Wow. That's intense, deep. A lot of chocolate flavor to it. And sometimes that comes through because of the type of malt that is used. But wow, there's a very dry finish to it. You know, I reckon this freaking is high in alcohol too. Am I being a bad boy? 12.5%. Does it have anything about the bittering units? No, it doesn't. But we're just having fun today. So, oh, speaking of having fun, a little bit later on, what I'm going to do is I'm going to crack open this right here. This is the Abyss 2010 Reserve from the Duchette Brewing Company, and it is a stout brewed with licorice and molasses, 33% aged in oak and oak bourbon barrels, and of course it rates right. It says this is best drunk, and this was bottled in 2010. It says best drunk after November 15th, 2011, and so I would certainly say that is the truth. And at let's see, 11% alcohol, it is just about as high as a bottle of wine, and it is not uncommon for beers to last that long. But let's get into the food part of this. That's why we're here. It's beer in the kitchen, and the reason I got associated with cooking with beer and beer and food and beer in the kitchen was my first book, John Wiley. This thing was published in 1995. I spent 94 writing it. It's a very interesting story behind it. What happened was they had already published a book called Wine Basics by Dewey Markham, and this is John Wiley, mainly an educational book publisher. And they had the book, the Beer Basics cover, and they had made an agreement with an author, but apparently it didn't. It fell through. And so, by sheer chance, I managed to find a way to I was told to send an editor a book proposal. Well, I have never done a book proposal. I sent 2 pages instead of 300, and it was accepted simply because they needed something to fill the book. So by sheer luck, I managed to get Beer Basics, and it came out in paperback in '95. But while I was doing Beer Basics, there is a chapter in here on beer and food. And let's see what the actual chapter is here. It's Styles of Beer, a short history of beer, how beer is made, what is beer, beers of Canada. Geez, I wrote the damn thing. Beer tastings, beer and food, page 139. And then the next is appendixes 151. So that was 20-something pages. And in a book that small, it was quite a bit. And I noticed that it was that we had to cut quite a bit. And I was getting recipes and all kinds of good stuff from chefs and people that I had contacted, mainly who were doing beer dinners. And so I said to my editor, I said, Claire, I said, what are we going to do? I've got massive pages here for this chapter. And she says, well, it's another book. And so Cooking and Eating with Beer came out. And that was in '97, 96 in the hardcover. and a year later in paperback. It has 17 recipes in here, and I learned a tremendous amount about cooking by talking to the chefs, particularly having them explain what they were doing. And some of the interesting things I learned was particularly is conservation of your kitchen. You waste nothing. I mean, even what you would consider trash, you use it. A particular instance was in South Carolina. There was a chef down there. They were going through a massive. There were the demand for shrimp cocktail, and a particular the cold platters for shrimp was astronomical. It was a real hit. And he noticed that as they were peeling the shrimp for the shrimp cocktails, the staff was throwing the shells away. And so he said, wait a minute, back the truck up. Save all those shells, because what he did is he took the shells and roasted them so that they were nice and crispy and had taken on a little bit of color. And then he turned that into stock. And it turned it into the best shrimp shell soup. Shrimp shell soup? Shrimp shell soup that they later became very well known for. And so that was one of the things of how not to throw anything out of the kitchen. The other I learned particular was the different ethnic cooking. Where beer was popular, there were many types of dishes. In particular, an example would be carbonade, which is a beef stew, a Belgian beef stew. Particularly, it's instead of using wine, it uses a dark beer. It has onions, small onions. It's usually a chuck steak. It's browned first. The meat is dredged in flour and salt and pepper. Then it is browned. Then the onion. Then some of the aromatics, the vegetables are added along with that, because you want to have them really reduced down into the sauce as it will end up making. And then you add your beer and onions, roasted onions, I believe. And the similarity between that and a bœuf bourguignon from France is simply that the French have I was about to say wine. This is almost wine. The French have the wine and cook with the wine, and in Belgium it was with the beer. And there's always just fun things to do. One of the, I would say recipes, but yes, in fact it is. It's a let's see if I can find it in here. We were having food, beer and food, Maibach at the Waldorf Astoria, chef's beer, cooking with wort, and then we had back here in the recipes, there's a cheddar beer soup, rabbit and creek beer sauce, deep fried squash blossoms with cassiri cheese that came from Nancy Schwartz in Stuyoffs in Corte Madera, California. But my favorite has to be the Naughty Gretchen. And essentially, this is from Jim Gagne, God rest his soul. He was a fantastic bartender at the Broome Street bar in Manhattan, New York. And it was essentially, we were there one afternoon killing time and trying to make drinks out of beer. And it was tough, but we came up with the Wicked Gretchen, the Naughty Gretchen. And it's 2 scoops of chocolate ice cream, 1 12-ounce bottle of dark or amber beer, and 1 cherry. Place the ice cream in a blender, add the beer to the ice cream and blend until frothy. Pour into a tall glass and place the cherry on top. And that was kind of a little joke, wicked with the cherry and the whole thing. But anyways, that was a hilarious. And there's a story later on that has to do with the Wicked Gretchen. And that was quite a story, I'll tell you. Oh boy, that's good. All right. Oh, you get the book story now, the beer book story. I'm going to go back to beer basics just for a second and tell you how I managed. Oh, I already did. Okay. Conservation, Wicked Gretchen. Oh yeah, here we go. When did I discover a love of food? Writing about cooking, I did have a little bit of a knowledge. Accumulated living a single guy, and I also had one of my first jobs. Yeah, my first job in New York was working in a restaurant. Actually, two restaurants, the Monk's Court and the Monk's Inn. One was on the east side of New York, and one was on the west side of New York. And so I did get a chance to sample some foods, and particularly after work, especially if I was working the night shift. It would be 3, 4 in the morning, sometimes 5, and would go out with. I would walk out with the chef that worked there, Michel, and he knew some of the other restaurants, of course. And one was the Box Tree, and I think it was the Trois Gras Brothers, and we're talking real wicked high end. And I would tag along with him and go into their kitchen and watch them make omelets for every. They sit around and make omelets and chit chat in French. I couldn't speak French then, and I can't speak French now terribly well, but it was quite a learning experience. So I did have a little background in that, but to tell you basically my appreciation of food, I think surprisingly enough, it started at Norwich, because I'll confess to you, I thought the mess hall food back then was good. Now that tells you a little bit about something about what mom's home cooking was like. So that was, I mean, so I liked the food in the mess hall, and especially the regularity. It was served family style. Back then it was long tables. Since I was a rook, a freshman, you had the long table, and you had to square your meal, and it was served by the busboys, and it was the milk bottles. Oh, glass milk bottles. You'd heave them down the table. Oh, more milk, sir. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. What an event. But I think my epiphany, as far as food can be something wonderful, happened on an off-campus. It was an off-campus. I remember off-campus poker game, and Bernie Kelly. Bernie was the guy's name. A classmate of mine. I can't remember his last name, but there were 4 or 5 of us playing the games, maybe more. And part of the fun of getting together, he was sautéing up venison steak because it was seasoned, and somebody had gone out and got themselves a deer. And I said, I love venison steak. That was really good. No problem. Venison sandwiches, and so playing poker and good stuff. And I had to hit the head, so I went and hit the head. Washed my hands, and then came back out, and I saw on the board there next to the sink was this blob of what I couldn't tell what it was. It just kind of, it looks gelatinous but kind of opaque. I mean, it was, yeah. And I said, what the hell is that? And he says, that's venison liver. Venison liver, huh? I said, shit, I hate liver. And he says, oh really? And I said, yeah. He says, how much have you won tonight? I says, $25. He says, well, I tell you what. He's sauteing up some more the venison steaks to put in sandwiches, and there's a little onion in there and butter. And so he says, I tell you what, I'm going to cut a slice of this off, and I'm going to saute it up, and I'll put it in a fork, and then you put it in your mouth. And if you can spit it out, I'll pay you $25. But if you can't spit it out, you have to pay me $25. Now I can spit anything out of my mouth. I mean, forget it. Don't dare me to do anything. I mean, I'll do it. So he puts it in there, sautés it up real nice, real quick, puts it on a fork, puts it in my mouth. I lost $25. I'll tell you, I did. I lost 25, and I was happy to lose $25. I had never tasted, it was as close to foie gras as you could possibly get. The butter, the onion, it was just, wow. So that was, I think that was the real food memories. And I've got a couple of them listed right here as well. In fact, this brings me back to the Wicked Gretchen. It was after Cooking and Eating with Beer had come out, so it had to have been 97, 98 maybe. 98, I was invited to the New England Culinary Institute, which was what was used to be Vermont College. And so I was at a bed and breakfast, and they wanted to know if I it needed a drive up to the New England Culinary Institute, where I was going to be talking about what I had learned from doing and cooking, doing the book, Cooking and Eating with Beer. So I walked up there and did a presentation, a little bit of a presentation. But one of the reasons that I was there was because they have a restaurant in Montpelier called Chef's Table, I think, or something along that line. And they did a book signing. And so I was going to be there for a book signing. And so I came up with a menu that had come out of Cooking and Eating with Beer, and had sent them by computer. And we're talking, again, 97. So we're talking, when you looked at a computer back then, it was WYSIWYG, and it was difficult. I mean, sometimes things didn't work out. So I got up there, and they decided they were throwing the dinner. They put the menu together. I talked about the recipes and worked them all out with the professional chefs that were there. And it came time to explain to the staff that were going to be working that night the menu. So we started out, it was some kind of a salad with the beer used in the dressing instead of an acid. Then there was a soup, a beer soup. I remember that was pretty much an onion soup, using beer though instead of stock. And then there was an entree, something, I believe it might have been pork chops sprayed with some kind of beer sauce on it. But at the end, it was the Wicked Gretchen. And so the chef is reading off the recipe for the ingredients to the Wicked Gretchen. And she calls off, and she was pissed off, man, because she was a pastry chef, and then this is just a fucking milkshake. So she calls off the ingredients. She says, it has 2 scoops of chocolate ice cream. She says it has 12 ounces of a dark or amber beer. It has cherry on top and a tablespoon of balsamic vinegar. Well, when I heard that about the 2 tablespoons, the tablespoon of balsamic vinegar, I said, whoops, what happened? Well, it dawned on me that what had happened was that when I sent the menu, the recipes that I had done in the book, that I had clipped one of the recipes for the salad dressing, and it had ended up in the Wicked Gretchen. So I was wicked embarrassed about that, which she said, but I didn't say a freaking thing. No, I just let it go. I figured, well, nobody said anything. So when I got back to New York later, I found out, I was talking to another chef, and I said, you know, I missed the recipe. I screwed it up, but it tasted great. And he says, well, of course it did. He says, well, that's one of the things in northern Italy. They put balsamic vinegar on their gelato. It makes it taste better. So a mistake in a food and that's the follow-up to the Wicked Gretchen. Let's see. Beer memories. Beer memories. Oh, yes. Beer memories. And this is probably, I shouldn't probably go into this, but it has to do with the psychology of the college students and the whole atmosphere of bars and the whole culture of bars. And I'll tell this story. How far are we into this? Oh, 4:27. Okay. Well, this one has to do with wintertime in particular. I don't know why it comes to me as a memory, but there was a bar in Montpelier called the IR. I call it the IR. It was the Industrial Revolution, and I think Blackie Stones was also part of it. But the Industrial Revolution I remember definitely because it was in a warehouse building, or it used to be a light manufacturing, and it was on the third floor of this thing. It's massive because you could have bands in there, and I mean it was huge. But to get up there, you had to go up these iron staircases on the outside of the building. Now, imagine that it's like February in the old days, and in the old days when it was actually snow and ice. Yeah, when it's a little bit iced up. I mean, that had to be the insurance man's nightmare. I don't know how they got away with it, but they did. And Moose Warrington, Carl Warrington was bartending. I remember that. And Vic Cano and Judy Roll. I remember they were a couple, but had an off-campus place. But Vic Cano was the leader of the band, so to speak. I know that was his band, and they used to play a lot of Neil Young. Man, I was in Neil Young at the time, but it was a large. I mean, large enough so that you could have a nice bandstand. And of course, it was the Norwich VC place to go. And you remember the old high school days where all the boys are on one side of the room and all the girls are on the side of the room. But it's pretty much the same at a college bar, except that they're circles of people. The people will get together and 4 people or 5 people will talk in a circle. Well, of course, there were the circle of my buddies, and then down a little bit down the bar was a circle of some young lady and her friends. And I realized that there was a technique that if I was talking to the fellow right there, there was usually a young lady who would be just off to, let's say, the left or right of his head. And if I just kind of stared just for a little bit, she would kind of feel uncomfortable and would move a little bit, so to get out of my view, and that would mean her friend would move in. And I learned to be able to turn groups of people that way. So it's a little bar culture story about college and the Industrial Revolution. Let's see, what here? Oh, well, this has, yeah, food, definitely a large banquet. One of the fun parts for me of extracurricular activity, I guess you would call it, would be, and no, legitimately, intercollegiate debate, college debate. In the United States back then, and I think, I don't know what it's like now, but back then, you would be, the whole nation would be given a topic. Our health system needs to be revised. Or no, our health system is too far gone to revive. And you would have to work as either a positive team or the negative team, whichever you would do. And you had to prepare for that, and you had large things of information. Back then it was little file drawers. We would walk in with file drawers, or not we, but debaters would walk in with these file drawers, which was very much like in the old days with a library. You would have those file cards in there. They research information from all kinds of sources. That was a really good thing to do. Boy, it was boy. And boy, was it dull, because you'd have, I think it was 10 minutes of presentation, 5 minutes rebuttal, then 5 minutes of, support, and then 5 minutes of defense. It was 20 minutes altogether, but both sides, 40 minutes. It was very structured. Well, there was a yearly tournament up at McGill University, and that was a lot of fun because it was parliamentary style, and you would go up and, well, first of all, the beer in Canada was great, and there was no real problem as far as drinking beer up there, where in the United States the age limits were being changed, and it was meh, but up there it was no problem. And the beer was extra tasty too as well. But McGill would throw this debate tournament, and it was parliamentary style, which meant that the speaker would go up to the chalkboard and would write a sentence, and it was toss coin whether you were the government or the loyal opposition, and you had to defend it or not. There was heckling that was allowed. It was a lot of fun. It was really, you were working on improv, you were thinking on your feet. It was a great deal of fun. And they always had this banquet in the basement of one of the cathedrals up there. And I vary from beer on this one, but it was always I remember a beef bourguignon for sure, and great crusty bread, and it was just the food was really great, and they served wine with the dinner, and a glass of wine, and then there was a glass of water, and the crudités that came around first were the usual. You had your carrots and your celeries and your olives, and so I'm sitting there, and there was a blonde young lady sitting across from me, and a fellow that I had met from the College Militaire Royal, and he was sitting across from me. We were talking, and I reach over to the crudité, and I pick up an olive, and I'm looking at it, and the young lady sitting across from me says, "Don't think about it, do it." And she was exactly right. I picked up the olive and I tossed it. Hit the other cadet right in his water glass. I mean, it was just one of those spontaneous things that, thank goodness, he took it as a joke. So that was my special memories of food. There was semi-Norwich, but not quite Norwich. Okay, now let's see. I've got 13 people here. Are there anybody want to speak up? Thomas Bedell, are you drinking the 2010? Joining in with a 2014. The 2010. You're talking the Abyss, right? Okay, I'm gonna crack this little baby open. Yes, sir, Bob. Let me get my implements of destruction. This one is sealed in wax, so I might have to call for reinforcements. I don't think so, though. I already cut my other thumb over the holidays with a mandolin. Never play with a mandolin. I'm talking about a kitchen mandolin. All right. Have I done the deed? No. Damn, they make this beer hard to get into. Oh yeah, Peter, if you would just use the strap that's attached there, don't you think that would make it a lot easier? Yeah. Yin yang. That's just breaking off easy. All right. Church key. Well, put your knife away first, yin yang. All right. All right. Oh, come on. You got to be able to open this, Peter. Frantically, he chips away at it. Boy, they really didn't want me to drink this beer. Well, why don't you take this off? All right, here we go. Well, that didn't sound good. Ready? Holy, it throws ahead. For those of you who are not beer geeks, that's a very good sign. It means it's carbonated, which means it's Oh boy. Okay, Tommy boy. The 2010. What am I expecting? I got no idea. Wow. It's very mellow. I mean, and to you, Tommy boy. Um, it reminds me of a mistake I used to make with scotches. I would challenge it, and it was one of the bar challenges. You say they put 3 scotches there, and I can tell you which one is which. I was notorious for picking. Well, at first I realized until I realized it. The first few times I did make the mistake of picking the most aggressive ones, and it turned out that they were the youngest ones, where the older ones had mellowed out. And it turned out that this 2010 Reserve, compared to the 2020 Oscars Blues, oh boy, now we got 10 years difference here, kids. Okay, let's do a taste test. When your taste buds are already up, well, let's do the one that I would expect to be the most aggressive would be the younger one, which would be the Oscars Blues. The least aggressive, the Abyss. Geez, I wish I do have some. I wish I had some water. Okay. Taste buds registering. All right. Now we're going to do the Abyss. There is a real, the Abyss at the end leaves you floating above or into an abyss. It's a nice drift into where our young friend here is screwing around with all the toasted almonds and Madagascar vanilla beans and stuff. They've created it's an impressive beer, but I think the Abyss probably. I'm glad I opened it. I'll put it that way. I'm glad I opened it. Is there anybody else there who has any kind of a question or thought? Oh yeah, class of '74. I gotta do that. Gee, that looks like a dork. Even with the cap on. Any questions? Any comments? Any observations? Well, for the record, I told you that I wasn't going to get into politics and I wasn't going to talk about this this here pandemic we got, but I'm going right now. It's called the coda. It's called the end of this little bit. I went to Norwich University from 1969 to 1974. Oh, Richard Provo. He thought of it a problem. Well, it kind of does, along with the rest of us. When you're young, you are kind of aggressive and full of spiky flavors and you know, grit. And then when we get older, I can tell you from experience, we mellow out. We just don't. We don't. And yet we have a lot of depth to us that sometimes goes unobserved until you take a real taste, until you get to really know somebody, until you really get to know a beer. Now I'm talking like in the movie Sideways, where he's talking about himself he's talking about wine, but he's essentially talking about himself as well. And so, anyways, Tom, you're drinking a 10-year-old version. I have a mere 6-year-old, but it's wonderfully drinkable. Not a trace of ox. Yeah, that's true. I think that might be why they covered it with the epoxy, well, not epoxy, but with the heavy duty stuff. No, it's not overpowering at 11. It is not. No siree. I don't think it is. But you know something, as far as age, sometimes it takes a little bit of age to understand something that's aged. It took me a while before I understood scotches. It took a while of experiencing it. We're not going to go there. There was another. Oh, maybe I have the bottle around here. Do I have it? No, rats and mice. We had a Russian Imperial Stout that we tried the other day, and it was incredible. Oh, a lot of heavy duty stuff. I think probably because I kept them around, because I knew that they were high in alcohol, and people, the breweries would send them to me, and I sometimes, especially the ones. Well, here where are my notes? Belching will get you anywhere. Oh, come on. I printed them out. I know I printed them out. Oh, sugar. I had a cheat sheet on the Abyss, but apparently I don't. But maybe I do. Let me just check once more. No. Well, I thought I did, but it was quite a story, and it has to. Well, anyway, where were we? Just finishing up my script. Here we go. Well, I'm going to enjoy just a little bit more of this Abyss, and as far as food in Norwich, well, a beer in the kitchen, it is an amazing thing to me. Is that anytime that it asks for either stock or water, all beer is 98% water, anyways, and the rest of it's flavor. Now, what type of flavor do you want to use? What do you need to do? What I have yet to do is to do a reduction. Wine can be reduced. White wine is a little acidic, but red wine reductions are always they're a lot of fun to do. I would like to try and do, say, a stout reduction, and not one of these really nice refined stouts, but a stout reduction or a lager reduction by half, just to see what the flavors would be, and perhaps they could be turned into flavorings for bars and this type of thing, or possibly for that's something. With food and beer, the experimentation is incredible, and I think that it's It's not as explored as wine, of course. It's always been the old mantra. But since 1974, really, when the small breweries began to catch the attention of the media and of the general public, and even of the beer geeks, when beer geeks started in '74, started looking for beers. Um, just thinking about how technology has changed since then. Back then I had a typewriter and carbon paper, and now here I am doing a video. I don't know if it makes you lazy. It's all communicating. It's all communicating, and I think that visual communication is so much more interesting, particularly when it comes to food, because and cooking. Oh my lord, to read a cookbook is one thing, particularly an old cookbook. Holy crummalama! You read some of the stuff from the 19th century and the 18th century. Trying to understand it, forget about it. Forget about it. And my good friend Betty Crocker and Julia, at least they explain things, yeah, a little bit. But until you see something done, particularly on video, food is so much of process. If you don't have your if you don't have your, pardon my French, if you don't have your shit together, your mise en place, cooking can be pain, it can be agony. But if you have everything prepared, if you know where every pot and pan is, if you know where every ingredient is, if it's all in order, it can be a symphony. It can be great fun. And of course, it can be nurturing and sharing. And I think that's what, oh boy, Jose Andres, man. I think it's Feed the Nation. I don't know. I think that is Feed the Nation. Jose Andres is the chef, though, boy. And if I give any money at all, boy, that dude, man, he's just an amazing chef. And so, beer and food and nurturing. That's I think that's probably where beer in the kitchen goes. It got monks through their fasting. It got pilgrims on their way. It started a revolution